Welcome to The Fiber, brought to you by LiveOak Fiber, where we weave together the stories of leaders, entrepreneurs, and changemakers who are the very fabric of their communities. Join us as we spotlight those who embody the spirit of connection, resilience, and progress.
Hey everyone, Garrett here with LiveOak Fiber. Today on the podcast, we're joined by Warwick Sabin, the president and CEO of Deep South Today, a nonprofit news network focused on strengthening journalism in the South. Warwick brings a rich background in public service and innovation, having served in the Arkansas House of Representatives and held leadership roles at Winrock International, the Aspen Institute, and Interfaith America. He's also a former publisher of the Oxford American and founder of the Arkansas Regional Innovation Hub. Warwick's career is a testament to the power of civic engagement, storytelling, and community-driven change. Warwick, thank you for joining us today. Give us a quick introduction to yourself and tell us what you do.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I am right now president and CEO of Deep South Today. We're a nonprofit news organization. I'm based here in New Orleans, Louisiana, and as part of Deep South Today, we have two newsrooms. One is Mississippi Today, which is the largest newsroom in Mississippi, won the Pulitzer Prize in 2023, and is doing just really outstanding work to cover the issues in that state. And then we also have Verite News, which is a newsroom here in New Orleans. It's about 3 years old and is growing rapidly. And our goal really is to meet the need for local news wherever it exists in our region. So we're really looking to grow the work that we're doing, cover more issues, serve more people, and expand our geographic footprint, which is exciting. So as you probably know, journalism has struggled a lot the last few years. It's especially struggled here in the Deep South, and we're rebuilding it with a new innovative model that I look forward to talking about.
Yeah, and listen, Warwick and I go back to Arkansas. That's where we first met. We served on the Arkansas Broadband Council together, and I can honestly say this: Warwick is he is the first politician I've ever donated to his campaign. And I still don't even know what party he's part of. Warwick has a heart for servant leadership. I really enjoyed working with him in Arkansas. Trying to enact some legislation. It was eye-opening for me. It was not house of cards like I thought it was going to be. It was maybe a lot less boring, but I really enjoyed working with Warwick, and that's how we kind of originally connected back then.
Well, the feeling's mutual, Steve, by the way. And I just want to say, thank you for inviting me onto this podcast, first of all. And that was a great experience, although it was a little frustrating. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that. I love politics and I believe in our system of government. It works better, when people are definitely committed to the public good and using the system the way it's supposed to. But when it brought me in contact with people like you, who again are volunteering your own time, when you're running a business and you're doing other things, it's it's really rewarding in that way. So thanks for saying that.
Yeah, absolutely. You and I had reconnected. You'd started down at New South here in the last couple of years, and I think local media is so vital for communities these days. But I just wanted to get your perspective on why you think it's vital, why you think it's important, and why you are at Deep South doing this now.
Yeah, well, I think it goes kind of to the history of journalism. Journalism was a really profitable industry for a long time, especially in the 20th century. And that was because people had to pay for the news. They had to have a subscription or buy it at the newsstand. Also, people had to pay to advertise in newspapers to kind of get their products in front of people. And so, newspapers had 30 to 40% profit margins for a very, very long time. And then the internet showed up, and all of a sudden people could get information for free. Maybe it wasn't the best information, but they didn't think they had to pay for it anymore. The advertising revenue went away because it was sort of stolen by Google and Facebook, who kind of got in between the customer and the news organization. And then even classified ads were taken away from sites like Craigslist. And so all of a sudden, this very, very profitable industry went to not having really any revenue streams at all. And that's sort of fine in sort of our capitalist free market system. We all believe in creative disruption. We all know that things change. You got to innovate. And so that's all fair enough. But then after a couple of decades of that happening, we started to realize, there's not really anything replacing this news at the local level. People have a lot of sources for international and national news, but nobody is really doing that hard work on the ground to tell you what's going on at the school board, at City Hall. When that happens, people lose connections to each other. They don't know what's happening in their communities. They don't know who to vote for. They don't know how to hold people accountable. They don't have stuff to talk about at the Walmart or the gas station. And it frays community ties. I mean, we've seen what's kind of going on in our civic life in this country. People, they're kind of all off in their own little worlds, in their own little corners. They don't even have access to the same information. And again, I'm not talking about even at the national and international level. I'm just talking about in their local communities. And so you start to realize, oh my goodness, we've lost something that's really, really important, and it affects the quality of our civic life, of our democracy, and how people can participate in it and know what's going on. And so we have to rebuild that, and it takes a different model. And our news organization is a nonprofit. It's nonpartisan and it's nonprofit, but it's basically acknowledging that it's hard to make money and make a profit in the news business now, but we're going to approach it like a college or university, like a museum, like a performing arts institution, where this is valuable. So we're going to kind of uphold it as a nonprofit organization, just have a different business model.
And I was going to ask, how are you using technology, digital platforms? How are you using that to do your storytelling? What's your, you don't have to give us the secret to the gravy, but just tell us how you're doing.
No, but we're proud of it. I mean, we're all digital, and it's all free. I mean, again, part of being a nonprofit is you're providing a service to the community, and so we don't make anybody pay for our news. So we don't have a paywall. We have, obviously our news goes up on our website. We have email newsletters. We're also distributing our news via all of the different social media channels. We've evolved our sort of news gathering in order to really incorporate multimedia, because more and more people, are, really wanting to get their information by short form video or podcasts or audio. So we're doing all of those things. We're on, TikTok, and we're even doing news via SMS texting, because there's some communities that really, utilize that more than others. And we're going to keep evolving. We want to be where people get information. We want to be in the formats that they are most likely to utilize. And I feel that, every week we have to have a new conversation about these things and figure out how to keep up with it.
I was going to ask, do you see, now that since you mentioned it, your focus on providing news at a local level, whether it's city council or anything like that, have you seen maybe an increase of community engagement amongst local governments, or just, I guess across the community and any type of organization across the board?
Yes, and there's data to back this up. I mean, when you have, a robust and effective local news, outlet, then there is definitely more engagement from citizens with their government, from government with their citizens. It's something I think we all took for granted. I mean, at least I'm looking at me and Steve. Garrett, you look a little younger than us, but we grew up at a time when there were local newspapers and radio stations, and it was sort of a no-brainer that that's how you sort of accessed information, engage with people, and really rebuilding that muscle in communities is important. And again, there's all of this data now through organizations like the American Journalism Project and other folks that really track this stuff to show that when you have more local journalism, the rates of voting goes up, the rates of sort of attending, civic events, and every measure of civic engagement always increases when there's more local news.
I mean, it makes
That's awesome.
sense, right? Because, I think sometimes at the national level, it becomes incredibly tribal. And, but no, most people want to know, where are the local jobs? They want to read about the local sports stores in the paper. They want that. They're very highly interested in the local stuff, because that's tangible, right? And it's hard to be completely tribal when you're playing Little League baseball with someone and shopping at the Walmart together, right? It's
That's right.
a defining component, right? It's just facts. They like that.
That's
And
right.
news at
No,
the
and
sorry.
go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was gonna say, news at the national level, you feel like you're just so separated from it too. Whereas, I'm assuming that as soon as you guys get, your newsletters out, or people start reading local stuff, it makes them feel much more inclusive and included into their whole community as a whole.
Yeah. I mean, what I'd say back kind of to both of you is, there's that old statistic that stays consistent, which is that people will hate Congress, but they'll love their own Congress representative, right? They'll rank Congress really, really low, but they're but I love my guy. And the idea here is that people connect with who they know. You don't dehumanize the people that are your neighbors, that are the parents of your kids in school, the folks you run into. I mean, they're human beings, and you may not ever even talk about politics with them, because you're not, to your point, Steve, you're not creating like tribes around it. It's just y'all are in the same community together. And again, it's those local news information sources that actually like create that baseline foundation of things, again, to kind of talk about, to relate around, to get together, to support. Without that, it's just really difficult. And I'll say one other thing, which is that like our country has lost a lot of these touchstones. I mean, people don't attend, religious services as much as they used to. They're not, going to as many sort of these events that bring different people together as they used to. And so we need to do a better job of knitting our communities back together. And one way of doing that is definitely through shared information.
When you were talking about how local news was delivered, I remember when the wagon train would arrive here in Denver, and we would all gather there at the at the wagon stop to get the news. No, I'm just dating myself, trying to make Garrett laugh. Back,
And you made it across with the Donner Party, was that it?
yeah, we made it. Yeah, exactly. We made it, absolutely. So I mentioned in the beginning, Warwick and I got to work on a lot of stuff in Arkansas, and it was you were a state representative right there in Arkansas, and you were a strong advocate for broadband. What was your interest in this? Because this is like when were we doing this, Warwick? This was 2015, like 10 years ago.
Yeah, I served 3 terms in the Arkansas House of Representatives. I got elected in 2012, so I served from 2013 to 2019. And, for me, it was a really interesting and exciting experience, but broadband was an issue that I came in really passionate to work on. And by the way, just in preparation for this podcast, I was trying to refresh my memory about some stuff. And even before I got elected to the legislature, I had been a journalist at the Arkansas Times, and I wrote a column. I wrote a column in like 2005 about needing, more broadband access in the city of Little Rock and the state of Arkansas. I compared it to rural electrification because it's one of those things where, for a long time back in the beginning of the 20th century, people were like, we need electricity out in these rural areas, and the utilities were like, no, it's too difficult. We can't string a power line all the way out just to like one farm out in the middle of nowhere, so just forget about it. And it obviously took, the rural electrification project under President Roosevelt to really, change the lives of people, and it changed the economic outcomes for folks. Obviously here in the South is where it had the biggest impact because it was where people were left out the most. But my point there is like, we wouldn't even think now of denying people electricity, right? Based on where they live. But that was a fight that had to be waged, 100 years ago. And so here we are, in the most powerful, rich, industrialized country in the world, and we still have places that don't have access to broadband internet at a time when you need it to do just about anything. I mean, it's commerce, it's now healthcare, it's education, obviously it's communication, which is the first thing. But like, what are we doing here? Like, how are we so far behind, and how are we allowing this to happen? And because it's the same arguments. It's basically folks saying, oh, it's too expensive for us to get this kind of service out to folks, when we know that like, it's not even an option anymore. And these communities are going to wither and die if they don't have access to it. And so that's why I came into the legislature super passionate about it. Besides the fact that, also I've been working with entrepreneurs, through the Innovation Hub that, I had put together and all of this stuff. And the last thing I'll say, because Steve, I know you know more about this than I do, but, I served as a Democrat in the legislature at the time when the Republicans were completely in charge. But the Speaker of the House, who was a Republican, appointed me to chair the broadband efforts in the legislature because he knew that, I was passionate about it. And it's not a partisan issue. Everybody benefits when we improve broadband access in the state.
That's absolutely right. I think, have you been following any of the BEAD stuff that's up? The BEAD, the Broadband Equity and Access Deployment. It's the federal broadband program that's coming out of you. Are you up to speed on any of that?
I mean, I've certainly been following it. I mean, it's again, an issue I care so much about. And obviously, it's one of those things where I just wish, it was even further along than it was right now. But yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what's great about that BEAD program is it's going to be it's money that was allocated, I believe, COVID, but it's going to be distributed at the state and local level. So the state and local people this time get to say, all right, I know what's best for my community. I know it's a reality thing, and so I'm going to get bids to get infrastructure into the people in my community, and they'll be able to award it that way. And I was going to ask, based on your time, when these state governments have access to this money, how can they better support these projects? What do you think, how do you think they should be thinking about these things?
Yeah, well, so a big part of, how we sort of had to approach it was obviously, in partnership with sort of the big broadband providers. And, I think that, one thing I learned through that process is that, the big broadband providers, they kind of already have their map, they kind of have their infrastructure they developed. And, what we were trying to do was obviously mostly incentivize them to grow out their networks further. The other thing that we were sort of thinking about was like all of the infrastructure that already existed publicly, through, the university and government networks and all of that. And so, you know more about this than I do, but, I felt at the time like if we could kind of deploy the money we had to fill in, the gaps, the places of most need, to create a bridge, to get, because when the private providers were sort of like, we can't go there yet. And it's sort of like, how do you make it so that, they can't say no, in essence. And it's got to be a public-private partnership, but, the public side of it, again, I mean, what we learned through rural electrification is that, like, the government can play a very, very positive role in making sure that the people who, get left out are taken care of.
Agreed. And I think that, I'm hoping that in a lot of cases in this, broadband deployment, especially in these rural areas, might be one of the largest infrastructure projects that ever comes through there, in a 20, 30-year period. If you're talking about real deployment, I'm talking about real fiber, hardwired fiber in the ground. I'm not talking about free Wi-Fi or satellites. I'm talking about real infrastructure that's extensible. But it's those organizations have to kind of be prepared for this turbulent construction period, which is not not always easy for those guys. They don't think about that every day.
Yeah, but here's the thing, like we really need to build more in this country, and I think people are really waking up to that. Like there are all these books that have just come out in the last few weeks about, abundance theory and, kind of a rethinking also of like, the Robert Moses era in New York, and looking back at all the, really fruitful experiences we've had in this country when we decided to build something. There was the railroads in the 19th century, whether it was the interstate highways in the 20th century, thinking about building, because what we know is when you build more infrastructure, yes, it can be disruptive to your point, but like the return on investment, the ROI is massive. And when it comes to broadband, it would be massive because otherwise the rural areas that are already being left behind are just going to be completely left behind. But if you make these investments, you kind of flip the script and all of a sudden people can start businesses, they can create new technologies, they can keep their kids in school, get access to healthcare when all these rural hospitals are closing. There's just all this stuff that changes the second that you put this infrastructure in place. So like, dollar for dollar, it's the best thing that I think you can do for the economy.
Yeah.
I did have one.
Go ahead, G.
Oh, sorry. This might be a long-winded question, but I want your opinion, both of your opinions, both Warwick and Steve, is, obviously we have BEAD that's starting to sort of dish out their grants to start construction. Now, as you guys have said, you started this in 2013, Warwick, where you were heavily involved in trying to provide some sort of broadband internet connection to rural areas, more than a decade ago. Now, I guess my question is, do you believe there needs to be some sort of change in the way we hold some of these larger ISPs accountable? Best example I can provide is that, one of the competitors that we compete with, in this area for a long time has received grants to, expand their networks, improve their networks in rural or just, just outside the city type areas. and all they do is accept that grant and never actually do any work, let it expire, and then kind of repeat that process. Is there, in both of your opinions, what do you think of something like that, and what do you think needs to be done to kind of prevent that, obviously as we start BEAD funding and whatnot?
Such a good question. I mean, what you described was my biggest frustration, and now that I'm not an elected official anymore, I mean, I can really say like, I mean, I was just so frustrated because yeah, we had all this money on the table. We had what I thought were sort of mutual goals, and also we were prioritizing the private sector in this. Like we were saying let's wire all these people up, and then they're your customers. And we still couldn't make progress with it. And to your point, we see all this money and all this time being spent, and we're still not anywhere close to where I think we should be as the United States of America in the 21st century, compared especially to some of the other countries in the world that are way, way ahead of us. And so to me, like, there's really no excuse for this. And I honestly don't understand it. And I think to your point, any additional monies that are invested in this need to be sort of, really strictly accounted for. There need to probably be, clawbacks if, the metrics aren't met. Like you basically need to say, we're making this investment and we're expecting this result. And if you don't meet the result, then you have to give the money back. That seems pretty straightforward. That's what you would do in any business.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's unacceptable. The fact that to your point, I was working on this at least a decade ago, and we're not near as far along as we should be. Like this already should have been solved by now.
Well, I'm jaded on my opinion on this, but I believe that a lot of these communication companies have made a lot of money from the federal government. And initially, you're exactly right. If the network doesn't exist, it needs public-private partnership to get it to exist. It's like paved roads. So we need to do that. We need to get that out there. But after that, you would expect that someone would have a mindset for, well, what does this look like at the end? Because it's a network. You've got to continue to make investments in it. You've got to continue to try to further things along. And what's happened, I think, in a lot of this funding is that in the beginning, they've making these broad, awards to people, and they've gotten better and better about the things that you're talking about, Warwick. I think they've gotten better about what's the expected result, how are we going to measure this, how are we going to hold people accountable. We need to, in the beginning, all these companies, there was no cable companies. All right, I grew up in the '80s. We had 3 channels, 4, 5 if you stayed home on Sunday and you could get the UHF to watch pro wrestling in black and white. But then you get cable TV comes into the '80s. But these networks didn't exist before then. So this is all new. But once it exists, it's, the way modern networks are looked at is they require, investment. They require continual investment to serve the customer need. I'll go back to your electrification analogy. I'm sure the first time they went to someone's house, they're like, I have 1 light bulb. And the next time they're like, I have 10 light bulbs. And then they're like, hey, I bought an electric washing machine. So the demand set of electricity was probably like through the roof. Well, now, the demand for electricity from one month to another does not go up by exponentially. It might go up 1% or 2, or maybe it's hot and you're going to run the air conditioning more or whatever. But broadband is not like that. It's it's exponential growth in short periods of time. And it's an incredible demand set. So it requires someone that's going to be thinking about it. That's why fiber, I think, is the most extensible technology. If you're going to invest in something that has the longest life, the longest capability, the greatest, potential down the road. Once it's there, it's glass. You're basically, how many colors of light can you get? That's how you're just changing out equipment on the end, but you got to get that infrastructure in place to do that. So how these companies look at it in the past, I think a lot of these awards have been trying to do the right thing, but I think you're right, Warwick. I think there's things that have to be attached to that. And I think we've gotten better as a country in these awards of creating, like you said, milestones and gates and performance requirements. And that's how it should be. But you're right, G, in the beginning, one of the strategies of the large providers is to get the award and then not act on it. And that's just gaming the system. And then the money is hung. The money is basically in limbo and can't be dispersed. And that doesn't benefit the consumer, but for them, it also keeps out competition. So now, thankfully, we're in this kind of fiber super cycle where there's a lot of platforms. LiveOak's not the only one. There's some other great ones around the country. There's Visionary Broadband out here in Colorado and Wyoming. And there's, Ripple Fiber up in the Carolinas is doing a lot. And Easy Fiber, down there in Texas is doing quite a bit. There's companies like us that are doing this brand new. And BEAD or any of these other programs are an accelerant to a business plan. They're not the business plan, which is different. There are companies in previous awards that are like, that's the business plan. It's like War Dogs. I'm going to get the contract and we're going to get the guns. I don't know how to get them, but we're going to get it, right? Those things do not exist anymore. That's not a valid, award.
Yeah.
So anybody that's trying to make a business plan out of a federal award is not required. But if it's done right, it should be an accelerant to push this further. So, and I was going to.
Do you think oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, you're good. Go for it.
No, I talk too much. I was going to ask Warwick, when, as part of your online journalism, you've got employees all over, right? You've got, a lot of your employees are probably what we might call digital nomads, right? Where they have high bandwidth needs for multimedia video, different formats. They've got to have broadband to be connected, right? I mean, that's the key to the job.
Well, totally. And actually, I was going to make this point that, as we're trying to do our job, which is to serve the underserved communities, the ones that don't have access, to good local news and information. We're in the Deep South, and most of our geography is rural, and the people who need what we're doing the most live in rural areas. And so, again, I mentioned, all the ways that we deliver our news and information, and it's all digital. And so, obviously, we want everybody to have access to the highest quality broadband. And I feel like at this point, again, it's essential. Like, it's obviously essential for the people who work for us to do this job because they're, using these tools and they're creating the video and the audio and the, bits and bytes that make up our articles and our websites and everything else. But then it needs to be consumed. And this is important stuff because, again, at this point, I just don't see how people can live fully in this economy, in this society, in this culture, in 21st century America without access to it. And it's not fair that, there's a divide between urban and rural areas in that way. And quite frankly, it explains, I think, a lot of the problems we're having in this country in terms of division, in terms of resentment, and the political implications of that, because people are kind of sick and tired of being second-class citizens, and they feel that way on a number of different levels. And broadband is just one manifestation of that.
I totally agree. I couldn't agree more. I was going to ask you, what advice would you give young leaders, in the South that are looking to create change, whether that's policy, business, media? What you've done it all. So what advice would you give people trying to make change?
Yeah, I believe in the young folks. I've been really impressed with, I speak at a lot of colleges and just meet with a lot of students who are kind of interested in either journalism or politics or business or entrepreneurship. And I'm really, really impressed. I think they have to approach everything with a problem-solving mindset if they want to be effective. There's nothing wrong, I think, with people having, their own strong opinions about things. But it's just really important to keep in mind that we live in a pluralistic society. This is a very diverse country. There are over 300 million people in it. We have an incredible form of government that is probably the best form of government to kind of take all of these different opinions and all these different people coming from all these different places and then distill it into policies and laws that best reflect kind of the greatest number of interests kind of in the country, right? But for that to work, you've got to come into it in a good faith effort to listen to other people, to find points of agreement, to not make it just like, I have to get my way on everything. Basically to have a sense of humility. I think all of us as American citizens need to think of ourselves that way, that we think we're smart, we think we have a good idea, we think we have the best opinion. But we're going to hold that, and we're going to listen to other people, and we're going to try to find, again, as many points of connection as we can. And that's how things are going to get better, and that's how you're going to solve problems. But if you're going to just stand back and insist on everything being your own way, or everybody else is an idiot, and you don't have to listen to them, then we're just going to continue to kind of move in this direction of division and problems never getting solved, and stagnation and dysfunction, and that's not good for anybody.
Yeah. I wholeheartedly agree with that. I feel like, especially, with the current climate of our United States as a whole in terms of how we talk about politics or just policy in general. I think kind of to your point where it's, we have so much difference of opinions today where I think if you really focus on what's local, bringing together the community to talk about the problems that could bring us forward, you really do, at least in my opinion, I feel like you see a lot more camaraderie kind of build amongst people that are even on different side of the aisles where they understand like this directly affects my neighbor, this directly affects me, and I can see that firsthand.
Yeah, that was my experience, by the way, in the legislature. I mean, like, if you came into things from a position of humility, of listening, building trust, you could have, folks that like really couldn't be more different than you and have all the most different opinions as you on different topics, but you could find ways to actually solve problems because in the end, like we're talking about broadband. I mean, I think everybody really wants that outcome. I mean, people want better schools. They want, better roads. They want, there are all these points of agreement, and there are all these really significant problems to solve. And if we just focus on solving the problems and finding those commonalities, we could be so much more productive. I just worry people just get so easily distracted. They let some bright, shiny object or somebody kind of making a lot of noise over here take them away from, all the good that we can do together.
The internet can be used probably for good and evil, obviously, but it's good to have yeah, it is. But it is good to have, organizations like yours that create a place where people can come together on these common issues, because I couldn't agree more. I think people are actually more alike than they're different, and you're right. Like it's hard to dehumanize someone when you see them in the parking lot, at the Little League baseball game or whatever. But you can come together in these, like your format, your completely digital online, journalism project. You can come together on that anywhere if you got the connectivity. If you can do that, you can make that happen.
Well, yeah, and I was just going to say, I mean, the work you do, I mean, is literally connecting people, and there's nothing more important than that, I think, because people, they want to feel connected within their community, they want to feel connected to folks outside their community. It's a resource that I guess, in a lot of ways we took for granted, not broadband specifically, because obviously it's only existed for a few decades, but just this idea of, having access to information, of, building these kinds of, bonds and connections. And, we really can't take that for granted because we see what happens when you lose these things. And that's why, like, I feel like journalism itself, I mean, it's so fundamental. It's basic news and information that you need to be able to sort of function in your day-to-day life. And if you think about the role that journalism played just in the founding of our country, like communicating the idea of America and what they were trying to accomplish and the arguments they were having in the Federalist Papers and at the, in the newspapers, like these were, and it wasn't even easy to print or distribute information at that time. And they still figured out ways to do it. And they were doing it, on these tough printing presses, and they were delivering it on horseback, and people couldn't wait to read it, and sometimes it took weeks to get the news if you lived out somewhere. So think about how lucky we are that we have the technology we have, but somehow we're letting ourselves get almost like less informed than people in the 18th century when our country was just getting started. It's crazy.
Yeah, well, I think there's, one side is, theater. They're looking for eyeballs, which is if you're running an internet site, you want eyeballs, you want people on it. And unfortunately, I think sometimes the shenanigans, the noise drives eyeballs, but real engagement is you have to be intentional about, so I think that's important. But you tell us a little bit about, in terms of New South or Deep South media, you have any big projects coming up? You got any new stuff, big thing on the horizon?
Yeah, we've always got new stuff. I mean, there's, I can talk kind of in generality about the fact that, as I kind of alluded at the beginning, we've got a lot of growth in front of us. I mean, we've basically built an organization that's intended to scale. It's like, I was describing the business model of journalism and how it's failed. And so what we want to do is make sure that like we have a better business model that can be sustainable. And so it's very efficient. Like we're supporting multiple newsrooms with the same kind of centralized business infrastructure, and the model and the value proposition is really being proven by the fact that we're reducing operating expenses and increasing our revenue. And so we want to take those additional resources and we want to just do more for the community. We want to provide more news and information. We want to expand our newsrooms. We want to expand the communities geographically that we're serving. I also mentioned like we really also want to make sure we're on the cutting edge of technology. So we've been really investing in our tech stack, our audience engagement efforts, our multimedia capabilities. So doing more in the realm of video and podcasts, and equipping our journalists to take something that they've written and translate into like a 60-second TikTok, that gets a lot more views and leads people to the reporting. And so we're doing that. We're putting a lot into resources around investigative reporting, because that's something that there's not a lot of in the South, and we're doing it really well. We won a Pulitzer Prize for it in Mississippi. And so there's a lot more to look into, and that's a public service, when you can reveal, things that unfortunately, shouldn't be happening, and nobody likes to read about that necessarily, but they need to know about it, because that's the only way, again, that you're going to like solve problems. So yeah, I mean, we're doing a lot of really exciting things. There are a lot of growth on the horizon. And, we also want to be a model for how folks can do this stuff in other parts of the country, because, we're in the Deep South, where, again, there are fewer resources than on the coasts, a lot less money, and a lot more people who don't have access to information. And so, when you're working in a region that has those sort of challenges, you just need to be better. You need to have a more efficient, more effective model. And if we can do it well here, then other people can do that in places like the Mountain West and, Appalachia and New England. And we hope to be that model.
Are you envisioning that you guys are going to basically have you're talking about reaching into other communities? Does that mean you're going to have more, jobs that you're creating, these rural places, people that specialize in certain geographies, certain towns? So right now you're basically Louisiana, Mississippi. Do you see this expanding kind of across the region? Is that your kind of vision for this?
That's exactly right. I mean, I'd say that we don't have like a manifest destiny plan where we have to like be everywhere in the South, but what we're doing is we're prioritizing things by needs. So like the places where there's need, we want to try to fulfill that need. And so definitely, creating some newsrooms in other parts of the South that are very similar to the ones we have in Mississippi and Louisiana, but are serving those other communities.
That's fantastic. Well, you're in New Orleans, so I'm going to have to ask, if you're going to visit New Orleans, is there certain restaurants, is there top 3 restaurants you should hit before you leave? And then I'm going to ask you where you think the best brunch place is, because I think this is really important, Warwick. I think people want to know these things.
Getting the real stories now.
It's important. The beautiful thing about the internet is you've got better sources than me. I'm going to preface this by saying, I mean, the food in New Orleans is obviously like the best. And, I think it was just a couple of weeks ago, Time Out, that big global publication. It's based in London, I think. They named New Orleans like the #1 food city in the world. And it's really difficult to have a bad meal here. So I've got this like list on my phone that is long of restaurants that I've been to that I want to try. So I would just say like, consult, all of the different sources, do your research. When it comes to brunch though, I mean, I think there's some like really classic places that like, if you haven't been to New Orleans before, it's sort of like a no-brainer to go to a place like Commander's Palace, or have lunch at Galatoire's, in the Quarter. These are just kind of like the classic New Orleans experiences. But the fun thing is, I mean, there's so many other places you can go that have more creative takes or more specific types of cuisine. So you can get like a really cool Latin brunch. I think there's a place called Acamayo that's like high on everybody's lists. There is a Chafalayo, which is like a very, very kind of neighborhood Cajun brunch that's not far from a place called Tipitina's, where you can find some good music. So I'm telling you, like, once you get somebody in New Orleans started talking about food or music, you're gonna have to strap in for a little while.
I agree. But I did want to get the locals' perspective on that. I think it's important. Well, is there any?
I think I've always told my fiance.
What's that, G?
I think I've only told my fiance that the only reason I'd visit New Orleans is I want to see the World War II museum. That's the
Oh,
only thing I've known that's been there. I've never,
Oh, there's so much here. You definitely have to come by.
yeah, you got to come back. I think one of the cool places I found was the New Orleans School of Cooking, which is a chef started, a local chefs starts, local and celebrity chefs started to keep the history of the food around. And you can go, I think, for 20, there's an entry level fee for a group thing, and they'll cook gumbo for you, and you'll be hungry, and they'll feed you, and it's great. But they can go, more and more in depth on that. We did this was a while ago. We actually did an online Christmas party with the New Orleans School of Cooking, and tried to make gumbo, which that was quite an adventure. We did it. They had a chef there. They switched because COVID. They couldn't. This was during COVID, so they couldn't open the school. So they opened this online thing, which I thought was great, and they had bandwidth. So yeah, we all got on and tried to do this, and I think we had 4 or 5 people on. I think we had 4 out of 5 gumbos were pretty good. I think one guy had never cooked before, and I think he struggled and might have caused a small kitchen fire. But the process was fun, and the results were great. So, yeah, you can't miss in New Orleans. He's right. You got to go there. It's one of America's. It's an incredibly unique city. So, yeah, that's kind of all I had today. I don't know if there's anything that we're missing. I did want to. Anything else we
Yeah,
want to
sure.
kind of
Sure.
jump into, or?
I mean, this was an awesome conversation, honestly. Like, I appreciate you letting me talk about Deep South today. And
Yeah.
obviously, I'm really glad we got to talk about all that broadband stuff. Like I said, I looked up a bunch of stuff. If you want me to send it to you, I was just trying to make sure that like I wasn't telling any lies or something when we came on here. So I wanted to go
No.
back and refresh my memory. But I mean, there was a lot written back then on what we were trying to do. Unfortunately, we definitely ran into some hurdles there for sure.
Well, sometimes you have to kind of soften the beaches. It may take a little while for the idea to kind of matriculate. And at least Arkansas in general was kind of a black hole in terms of fiber, probably up until the mid 2000s. And so I know when my family and I moved there, it was kind of like going back in time. They desperately needed fiber. And I think at least at the company I was at, we built a couple thousand miles of fiber in a very short period of time to connect. And I just look at it like paved roads. I'm like, we're going to need paved roads, digital paved roads to get to these areas. And I don't know if we'll get to serve that town right away, but it's important, to start to push this infrastructure further and further into the rural. And there's incumbents, and you're always going to have that, and they have their way of doing things. So I'm excited about the future. I'm excited about all these other platforms around the country, because I think competition is good for everyone. It's good for us. We have to raise our game continually to elevate. I mean, we basically work in a lot of people probably think what we do is a commodity. I don't, but it's my job and Garrett's job to convince them otherwise. It's, there is a value in connectivity. There's different flavors, so it's not all vanilla. There's some rocky road in there. There's some really, different plans based on what you need. But yeah, I would say we did a lot. That was back in the mid 2000s. But look at it now. If we hadn't kind of started doing those things, like I think that one of the things I thought Arkansas did really well was the telehealth network, and where people were, I think Arkansas ranked 52nd in terms of stroke detection. That's behind Guam and Puerto Rico. So meaning like you go in the hospital and good chance they're not going to diagnose you for stroke and you're going to die. Now, the telehealth network that Arkansas put into place was in every county. It was a kiosk supposed to be used for stroke detection. They also advanced that into like pregnancy. So if you needed to see a doctor in Little Rock, but you couldn't drive for instance, Jonesboro to Little Rock, you could set that up because all the units were linked together. And then, but this was in 2013, 2012 when this is built. And that network was in place during COVID. That network made healthcare possible in Arkansas during COVID because you could drive down. They were already set up for it. You could sit in a room. There was a kiosk. You could, talk to a doctor in Little Rock or Detroit or New York or Boston or wherever you wanted to talk to if it was on that network. So that's like an impact, an outcome of an idea that was done. And then, who thought there was going to be a global pandemic where telehealth was going to be needed? So, and then it accelerated. Now it's quite normal. least at our company, if we have a health plan, if you want to get a telemedicine consult, be careful, because when you press the I'm interested button, they're calling you. They're like, we got an opening right now, right? But you got to be ready when you hit that button. But that would have been unheard of, because I think back then it was just trying to get, how are we going to pay the doctors? I get it. They need to be compensated for their time, but the pandemic and having the broadband infrastructure that created the necessity, and the problem got solved. So I thought that was really cool.
Yeah. And one of the things you even said, Warwick, was comparing, or not necessarily comparing it, but maybe that's what I'm doing actually, is with in electrification of rural areas. I mean, in reality, I almost look at that the same way that broadband and expanding into these rural areas is the same exact thing, where the electrification, more than likely these rural families or people that lived out into the sticks, for lack of a better term, are our farmers, the people that feed America. And again, same thing with electrifying it. It industrialized, or excuse me, revolutionized the industry. The yield has increased. All these different things have come from just doing this simple industrial, or God, why do I keep saying industrial infrastructure project. And the same thing can be done with broadband, is that you invest it now, and all of a sudden let's see what changes for these rural communities, for our farmers, with the use of internet. I mean, they're doing, I'm not sure if it's AI, but automated harvesting in certain areas with tractors and whatnot, which is, I wouldn't even imagine setting it up myself. But so it's amazing on what like a small investment in the grand scheme of things can actually do for huge industries in rural neighborhoods and communities.
Such a good point. I mean, like, ag innovation is amazing. And if you've ever been like in a modern combine, or you've seen some of these farms, and they're completely automated. I mean, they've got like, whether it's the amount of water that they need, the amount of, when things get harvested, like everything, they've got some technology or device or something going. I mean, it's like these farms are like modern, you know, uh, just robotic, incredible, operations. I mean, it's just something like almost like a military thing out of like a sci-fi movie. It's incredible.
Yeah, you'd almost look at it as like it's a factory almost, where it's like, yeah, automated machines doing their own thing, and you have two people that maintain it, and you're done.
Well, and you think about, I don't know if you remember, I think you were there, Warwick. We were bringing in farmers when we were talking about this project, and there was a farmer that came in. They raised chickens up in Northwest Arkansas, and he had automated all the functionality in the chicken houses, which sounds, a simple statement, but you're talking about environmental conditions, you're talking about water, feeding, monitoring the chickens and all that. He had it all on his phone. So he had broadband to the farm, and he had all the chicken locations wired up, and he could come to Little Rock, meet with us, and say, "Oh yeah, I'm turning on the feed, I'm turning on the water. This issue with the temperature, I'm alerting someone, whatever." All from the all because he was connected, and he could tell us that. So yeah, and imagine how much more yield that guy can get, now by kind of automating. I was going to ask you, Warwick, you're on your tech stack. Are you guys looking at AI at all, or how do you think AI plays a role in, journalism today?
Yeah, well, we're not ignoring AI, certainly. I think we're proceeding cautiously, because
Yeah,
we don't want to replace our journalists. I mean, we feel like there's so much value, obviously, in the human production element of journalism, in terms of
right.
interviewing people, talking to people, understanding the nuance of a community. If anything, AI feeds off the content that folks like us create. That's what the learning model is, and that's when you get your AI summary, they're usually summarizing something that like a news organization, created, because otherwise it doesn't get created. Now, where we think there's some really great utility for AI in our news organization is in supporting the reporting efforts that our journalists are doing. So, analyzing big data sets,
Yeah.
being able, again, to kind of like, really work through, because a big part of, journalism is like having to sort through lots of information, and and finding the golden nuggets and working through the minutes of,
Yes.
meetings and doing OI requests and all of that. So if we can make our journalists' lives easier and we can help them do their jobs better with AI, then great. But I just want to emphasize, what we don't want to do is get in a position where, we're asking AI to write the news or produce the news, because I just think that's going to be of low quality and low value to the people we're trying to serve.
Well, that's a sophisticated answer. I would have said, I've seen all the Terminators, and we don't want to create Skynet. We don't want to give the machines complete control over everything, because it just doesn't end well. I mean, it's an endless cycle of the thing and having to go out and get the machine and all that. So, we find we are I agree with you. I know you can write a lot of things with AI. I think that we've found it very useful in doing exactly what you're saying, analyzing big data sets, looking for trends in, customer service or, demand generation. It's the same thing you're probably using it for. How do I find, how do I get more relative eyeballs to my site? What should I be changing on that? What does that data look like? So it's an amazing amount of information that can be, distilled into a single shot of information, as I would say.
I find myself using it a decent amount. I mean, I'm on the creative side, so I mean, Warwick, this is probably something that you guys deal with on a regular basis too, where it's for me personally, I love writing, but there's times where I have that creative block where I can't even put, pen to paper in any way. I tend to use it to help organize my thoughts or proofread something I've written, or just try to formulate into something that sounds a little bit clearer or better. And oftentimes I do see it because, especially once you get into subjects that are a little bit more complicated, that it's, something that you explain it to me like I'm a fifth grader. I tend to do that too. And especially, perfect example is fiber. How does the internet work? How does data get transferred? Why am I lagging when I'm trying to watch my Netflix shows? Things like that. You can convert a 10-page paper that's all technical terms into something that, why is my Netflix lagging? Well, you probably don't have a device that's new enough, and that's simple as that type of thing, where it's you use it to kind of simplify messages for the general population to really understand. And I think it's a vital tool to really, in my opinion, help what used to be done by teams of people into one person.
Yeah, it definitely helps jumpstart that creative process. I think it's great for that. Tangible, can you think of a lot? You've been there 3 years? 3 years at Deep South?
2 years.
All right.
2 years.
2 years at Deep South. You've got some stories of how you've changed people's lives?
Oh my goodness, lots of them. One of them very recently, there were mothers released from jail because of reporting that one of our journalists did in Mississippi. These were women that had utilized drugs in the past, but had kind of gotten past that, but were still basically locked up. And after the reporting was published, the law enforcement officials decided that they needed to let these women out of jail, and it was a kind of a tremendous change in their lives and their ability, obviously, to take care of their kids and all of that. And that's just one recent example. But yeah, this is why we do the work that we do.
Warwick, thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me. This is really cool.
Thank you for tuning into The Fiber. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe. If you want to learn more about LiveOak Fiber, visit us at liveoakfiber.com.